everyone, this is Tiffany Kelley and it is 6 o'clock Eastern Time on Monday. I hope everyone had a good day today. I am here to talk to you about what I posted about a DNP or a PhD. Which one should you choose and what's the difference between them? And before I get started on that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Tiffany Kelley, and I am the founder of Nightingale Apps and Eye Care Nursing Solutions. Nightingale Apps is a mobile health technology company delivering solutions to nurses working in hospital settings with our Know My Patient app. Sorry about this, I have a hair. And Eye Care Nursing Solutions is our consulting services and education services for healthcare organizations about informatics needs, etc. I don't want to spend too much time on that. You can check us out on our website to learn more. But why I think this is a relevant topic is that I get asked this question a lot. So I am a nurse. I started as a pediatric nurse, graduated Georgetown 2000, and quite honestly never thought I'd go back to school. I did pediatric nursing across the country for about 3.5 years, almost 4 years, and then started to think I want to do something else, but what should that be? And I enrolled into a master's program to learn administration and learn how to think about nursing and healthcare as a business, and then was presented with an opportunity to take on a PhD role. And at that time, I knew nothing about a PhD program other than it was what was considered a terminal degree. So I will share the specifics of that story later, but wanted to really dive into what exactly are these two degrees, why should you be thinking about it if you are thinking about graduate education, and what are the really core differences between the two, because there are differences and it should influence how you make your decision, hopefully a little bit better than I did for mine. Everything worked out fine. So PhD, what does that stand for? It's a Doctor of Philosophy. DNP is a Doctor of Nursing Practice. So you've got two different pathways here. One is more research focused and one is more practice focused. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about what a PhD is and what that program looks like. You can go online and Google this and you'll get tables that'll tell you like at a very high level what the differences are, but the experience itself is different. Between the two. There's some similarities, but in many ways there's just core differences. So a Doctor of Philosophy and Nursing Science, the PhD, is one where you are being trained to be a nurse scientist in your field, and you are generating new knowledge within the discipline that previously hadn't existed before, which is kind of cool if you think about that. So you're finding out things that nobody else knew yet. I know that it could sound a little boring, but really it is pretty interesting. And the approach taken there is that you are in a program for, say, probably at least 4 years, 4 to maybe 5 or 6, depending upon how long you take to complete the program. And you are immersing yourself in science, really learning about your philosophical perspective on the world, conceptual knowledge and theoretical frameworks, and then research methods and statistical methods. So what does all that really mean? Well, I can tell you my first assignment was to describe my epistemological view of the world. And I thought, oh my God, I don't even know what that word means. And so really it's taking it from like a very abstract beginning to think about, you know, what is your view of the world, like to break it down. So how do you look at things in the world? And we all look at things a little bit differently. There's some key ways to look at the world, but from a very abstract perspective, there are really, I think, if I recall correctly, about 3 main groupings. I'm not going to get into the specifics of that because I'll definitely lose you. But once you understand that, then you start to dive into theoretical frameworks. So what is a theoretical or conceptual framework? Well, it's a way to think about something that's a little bit more concise. So for example, quality. So we look at quality in 6 different metrics, right? So safety, efficiency, timeliness, equitable care, patient-centeredness, and I always forget the sixth one. But there are 6 through the Institute of Medicine. And then dive into really figuring out what the problem is that you're trying to solve. So you need a question, but before you can get to the question, you need to first understand what the problem is. And to understand the problem, it's when you dive in to figure out what exactly what's the gap in knowledge that we don't have that you can build on top of. So to give you an example and get out of the theoretical concepts for a second, my initial question in my doctoral program was, what does knowing the patient mean to nurses? Because I walked into that program and talked about, I kept hearing nurses say, I feel like I don't know my patients anymore. And it was after the implementation of electronic health record. So something between those two activities drove us to have this reaction from the nurses. And so what exactly happened? And so I started there and then had several other research questions. But to use this as an example, I think this is a good example. So what does knowing the patient mean? Well, we can think we know what it means, but when you're in a research framework, you really have to dive in and say, okay, who else has researched this before? So you do a literature review and you understand the science behind things. And has anyone written about this before? Is it a concept that exists in the literature? And how has it been framed? So I did that and found that others had written about it as an expert level nursing practice, but had never tackled it from the perspective of information needs, in the sense that it had been talked about as though only expert level nurses could truly know their patients. But if every nurse, if knowing the patient is a precursor to delivering high quality care, then my argument was, well, then every nurse should have the ability to do so. So how do we provide everyone with the same knowledge base? Through information needs. So that was my question, my research question. That led me to, and the concept was knowing the patient. And now I had to figure out how to tackle that problem in a research method approach. And that was through qualitative research. So I'm sure if you are listening to this and you've gone through a bachelor's program of nursing, you had a research course, and it was probably not your favorite, or at least it wasn't my favorite at first. But I grew to really like it because it teaches you methods for how to understand and dig away at what you're trying to solve and really come to a source of truth. So I used a qualitative method, so quantitative versus qualitative, and quantitative tends to be more numbers driven. The power is in the numbers and the statistical significance of what you find. With qualitative research, you have usually a small number of participants, but very rich data that allows you to have great insight on what's going on. So whether or not you're a quant or a qual really only is based on your research question, because then I did other research questions that were quantitative and then mixed methods. So anyway, my point of telling you all of this is that the research program, the PhD, starts with you getting immersed into the science of philosophy, concepts and theories, and research methods. And then you're applying that by finding out what your problem is, what your question is, and how you're going to solve it. So you've got the typical educational approach, and then the application of that through research. And this is something that is not a course-by-course activity. It is a complete immersion. So you're doing all of this towards the end goal of completing your dissertation. And you take coursework to do that. We had 3 years of coursework. And then you're conducting research alongside your coursework and writing grants and working to publish papers. So the grants are written so that you learn that skill, because it's a skill. And it's very powerful if you have that skill, because then you can apply for federal dollars that can help you generate new knowledge and build program of research. And then publishing papers. So you've got this idea for what you want to solve. You've got to get the funding to do it through these grants. Go and conduct the research. That's another skill that you learn, how to be a nurse scientist. And then really summing it up in a research paper, a publication. So that is the process. You've got to have the question, you've got to have the evidence that's important, write the grant, conduct the research, write the paper, and then hopefully you're able to go and have that implemented and talk about it at other conferences. So that is the PhD process. You are going through classes to immerse yourself. You're learning about statistics, research methods, conceptual theories, and then content. So whatever your area of content is. So mine was informatics. So I took a lot of courses on informatics, additional research methods classes, and anything else that was going to contribute for me to be successful. I say this because I don't want folks to think you take a class and you take another class, and by the time you take all the classes, then you're done. That's not really how this works with a PhD program or a DNP, and I'll talk about that next. But rather, you're working towards an end goal of your dissertation, and I pulled mine out just so you could see what it looks like. So this is mine, my dissertation. 4 years worth of work there. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a lot of building of effort. So that is the process of a PhD program. Some other things to keep in mind. So you might be thinking, what would I do with this after the fact? What would I go on to do after I graduate? And the traditional pathway for those that graduate from our PhD programs are to become nurse faculty members or nurse scientists in organizations such as hospitals or privately or publicly held companies that need that person with that skill set. Usually folks will go on to do what's called a postdoc, and that's another year or two after your PhD, so that you have time to work on what you just spent 4 years, 5 or 6 years on to get those papers out and generate more funding. It's considered protected time in some ways. You're not a student, but you're not necessarily a faculty member, but you're learning what's next. Many people do that. I did not do either of those things. I think there's another pathway that's possible, which is one that I took, which is as you're generating new science, you're making new discoveries and potentially new inventions. And so it's a great launch pad if that is something that you've been able to figure out, to be able to take that and go work towards a commercialization. Happens all the time in other disciplines of PhD programs. So I think that's another thing that we'll see on the rise. It wasn't common when I finished, but I'm seeing more people speak out and talk about what they've been able to do. So that is what you can do after the fact. A couple of things to consider when you're thinking about, again, deciding. So class size, cost, full-time versus part-time. Class size are usually small, usually in the single digits, because of the number of the amount of mentoring that you need to be able to really succeed. I had 2 other students in my cohort, so there were 3 of us total for 4 years, and but there have been class sizes of 10 that have from the same program. Full-time versus part-time. Depending upon the program, you are not allowed to make a decision to go part-time. It's full-time or that's it. And that was the case where I went, which also ties to funding. So a lot of research-intensive institutions, such as the one that I went to, offer full tuition support and stipend support for their PhD students over 9 months, and the summer isn't included. But that covers your courses and a small amount of money for you to be able to, pay your rent and some of your bills. You're really a full-time, that's your job during that period of time. There are a lot of programs that go part-time. I know a lot of people that have done that. It's definitely doable. I think it's just a matter of what you decide to do. For myself, I didn't really investigate this greatly. I was really presented with, I'll tell you. So I was finishing my master's program and was having a lot of questions about electronic health records and are they really driving higher quality care and safer care, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And but I was really excited to finish my master's program. And my advisor at the time, who was a wonderful woman, her name is Jane Arroyan, she just was fabulous in terms of mentoring me and sort of seeing what was next for me before I even could. And one day she gave me a piece of paper that talked about a PhD program at Duke. And I looked at it and I said, I don't want to do this. So she said, Tiffany, just apply and see what happens. And I did. And I did it for her. I had no intention of pursuing that. It wasn't on my radar. I figured it'd be something I'd do long into the future. But it didn't work out. I mean, it worked out well, but it didn't work out according to how I thought it would be, which is usually the case. So I only applied to that one particular school, but there's lots of different schools around, and I did some research today to find out exactly how many there are in the United States, and there's a little over 100 PhD programs in the United States. There isn't one in every state, but there's about over 100. Now, I'll move to the DNP. So I talked about the PhD for a while. So the DNP, the Doctor of Nursing Practice, is a newer degree. So the PhD was around the 70s, started to become more common in nursing anyway. And the DNP is something that really started to emerge in the early 2000s. And it was in an effort to advance nursing education towards a doctoral level for those in nursing leadership. So there's actually some great literature on this, on the American Association College of Nurses. And in 2004, the AACN called for moving the current level of preparation necessary for advanced nursing practice from the master's degree to the doctoral level by the year 2015. So that is really when things started to shift, and we started to see more doctoral of nursing practice programs. And the Doctor of Nursing Practice is built on top of master's education, really driving home evidence-based practice, quality improvement, and systems leaderships. So the people that are taking or who are applying for these roles are really looking to advance their leadership skills, their ability to translate the science that's generated from the PhDs into practice, and have that terminal degree. And what I mean by terminal degree, it's the last degree. It's the last degree that you would get for your discipline, and translate that into practice while having this wealth of knowledge that allows you to be at the table with others that are just as educated as you. I think it's a strong degree for folks that are committed to working in the practice settings. So these might be chief nursing officers, they might be chief nursing information officers, anyone in the C-suite, nursing directors or nurse managers. I've even taught staff nurses that are looking to advance their degree. These are folks that really love the practice environment. They want to learn more about how they can take what's in these research articles they're reading and implement that into practice. And that's really one of the main goals, is to be able to, what would be ideal, in an ideal world, right? You'd have a research team that has a PhD and a DNP, so that throughout the whole process, you've got someone that's generating the science and someone else who's thinking about, how am I going to take this and implement this once this is done? Because once you sort of break that apart, or don't start with it that way, at least from my point of view, it takes longer to take that knowledge and then translate it into the practice environment. And depending upon where you read or what the source is, I've seen a variety of different year amounts that it takes to translate that evidence into practice, anywhere from 10 to 17 years. In general, it's just a long time. So, what else did I want to say? Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So similar to the PhD, this again is a program where you are immersed in advanced coursework and also have a capstone project. So you're not writing a dissertation, but you're writing a capstone project. And you are taking courses such as nursing leadership, healthcare finance, informatics. What are some of the other ones? Your capstone courses, you're learning about leadership skills that you're going to need from a didactic way, and then applying that through your capstone project. And the idea of the capstone project, depending upon the school, depends how many courses you'll take. But one that I taught at down the street, Northeastern, they had 3 courses for their capstone. And so they pick a project that they can work on and identify a problem and do some research, and then think about how they could create a solution towards that as a quality improvement project, going through the IRB, working with folks within their facility or whatever the location might be, and then working to write that up for a publication. So very similar in the sense of the processes at play. This program, these DNP programs tend to run, it depends on if you already have a master's degree or if you're coming from your bachelor's, but 2 to 4 years, depending upon what your educational background is. And some advantages, at least the way I see it, is that there's a lot more flexibility. So there are over 300, I counted today, I think 329 doctoral nursing practice programs in the United States, which is a lot. It's 3 times as much as the PhD. And they're in every state. And many of them allow you to do the program online or hybrid, which means all of your courses are online if it's an online only program. Benefits of that is you can apply to a school that's not in your state. So if there's a school that you really wanted to go to or a professor you really wanted to learn from, you don't have to move. Hybrid, you take most of your courses online, and then you have some, maybe once a semester you come on campus. I taught in those programs at 2 different universities, and so most of the course was online. We worked on Blackboard, and then we had 2 days over the course of the semester where we would meet, and we'd have a longer class and really work on some of those things that we needed to talk about in person. And I think most people liked that framework because they got to meet their classmates and also their faculty members, and it's just a couple of days, so it's not as disruptive as if you had to move. So I think that's an advantage. The class size tends to be, I think that varies too, depending upon the school, but what I've seen and what I've taught in has been anywhere from 15 to maybe 30. So you get a chance to learn from many other people in your class. It's often, there's group projects, because I believe strongly, at least I taught this in my informatics class, that when you're in those types of roles of being a nursing leader, most of the work that you're doing is with other people. It's rare that you're in your office all day long and not in a meeting, whereas in the PhD program, I spent tons of time alone because I had to work on my research. So that's a big difference. So that might influence people if they like to work alone or if they like to work with groups. Hadn't thought of that really until just now. So I talked about the class size, group work, independent work, a lot of papers and some tests. But again, you're working towards the end goal of having that knowledge base at the end where everything's tied together. And then in terms of cost, so this is a little bit of a difference from the research-intensive PhDs where the tuition varies. I'm not going to get into the sticker cost of that, but if you can Google and take a look at different programs and see what that looks like. What I will say is it's an investment in yourself, and if you are working at a university or an organization, they often have tuition support. So you can apply for some monies to be applied towards those classes. There are also other ways that you can get some additional support without having to take out loans. Some schools offer teaching assistantships or graduate assistantships where you spend a certain amount of time a week with a professor to help them with their work, and that goes towards some of the cost of your school. So there are ways to kind of lower that price, but they do generally, if there is one that has full tuition support, I'm not aware of it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, I just don't know if it's out there. You can do full-time and part-time, so that, I don't know if I said that already, but you have the flexibility of taking a couple classes at a time or going full-time. So there's a lot of flexibility, I think, because people realize that a lot of the people that enroll in these classes, which I have some stats on that, I think there's about 25,000 people enrolled. Let me find it. From 2015 to 16, the number of students enrolled in a DNP program increased from 22,000 to 25,000. So That's a fair amount of people that are enrolled. But if you think about where they are in their career and they want to advance their leadership skills and they're not wanting to quit their job to go full time, then they probably you're in a position where, stepping away from that role isn't really an option. So the part-time really allows for that flexibility so you can continue to build your career while you're building your education. And I did that with my master's degree, and I think it's a really viable option for a lot of people. I have no idea how long I've been talking for. Let's see if this will tell me. I can't tell. But so those are some of the core differences between a PhD and a DNP. I think I told you what you could do after your DNP program. Nurse executives, nursing directors, working at different organizations. You could probably start your own business too, especially if you're an advanced practice nurse or have an idea for something the way that I did. But I think the most important thing is that I would like for people to think about is not necessarily the title or the job you can get, but rather what do you need to know to get to the next step that you want to do, and what do you want to learn? And if you can take away the title and the prospect for what the future role could be, it'll allow you to focus on what you're learning. And this really drives home, like, before you venture into something like this, what exactly do you want? What's your next step? Where do you want to go? What do you need to get there? And what learning do you need to get there? Because if you think about it as, well, if I do this and I'm going to get that job, I think it's going to be a really challenging experience for that long of a period of time. 4 years is a long time. And you have to immerse yourself in this because what you put in is what you get out. So yes, you could pass the class, but it's really not about the grades. And I used to tell my students I'm less concerned about the grade than I am about you understanding the concepts that I'm teaching you so that you can use them in your future role. Mess up with me because nobody's going to see it but me. But when you're in the practice environment, in the research environment, that's where it matters. So make sure you know what you're looking to achieve and think of it as an investment in yourself. I think I'm sure there were DNP programs when I was applying to the PhD, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is today. So I was really, saw that as the terminal degree for me. And I had also studied under people who had gone on later in their career to go get a PhD. So I always had it in my mind of maybe, but it sort of was accelerated a little bit faster than I had anticipated. So I think I covered everything that I wanted to. I can talk briefly about the application process. So it's pretty standard. You have to fill out an application. You have to take the GREs. If you haven't taken the GREs, you might want to take a prep class. If you've taken the GREs, it's good for a few number of years. You need to use your transcript. You have to write an essay. You need letters of recommendation. It's all pretty standard stuff and shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. I think it's more that's just the rite of passage, if you will, to be considered for the position. Some will do interviews, so they'll interview you to see if you're a fit for the program. That happened to me. I had been interviewed. I had 2 or 3 days of interviews when I was in the applicant pool. And some have rolling admissions, some have cutoff dates. I think it just depends. So I hope this was helpful. If anyone has any questions, feel free to fire them off. Or if you've got thoughts or something that, I didn't touch upon that you know of, feel free to fire it off as well. I'm a big proponent for education. One of the things that I was taught, and so I'll leave you guys with this, is one of my professors at Hammond, who is a wonderful man. He's an engineer. And he was on my dissertation committee, and he challenged me to think differently, and I did. But he would say, the benefit of having a doctorate education is that you don't know everything, but you know how to figure out what you don't know. And so I really believe that to be true. It teaches you how to think differently. So with that, I'll leave everybody to go enjoy their Monday evening. And I kept it to half an hour, it looks like. I know I started at 6. So hope you enjoyed it. Take care. I think next week I want to talk about mentoring and mentorship, because as I was preparing for this today, I think mentors are huge value, and it's not like checking the box. You can't just go out and pick someone to be your mentor. It has to be a good fit. So anyway, I think that'll be next week. Have a great night, everyone. Take care.